6 seconds. That is the number that defines this story. Not because it is dramatic, not because it sounds impressive when stated plainly, but because 6 seconds is the precise and verified interval between the moment a 290-pound three-time collegiate wrestling champion exploded forward with 12 years of competitive muscle memory behind him and the moment he was lying on the mat of a Los Angeles gymnasium unable to stand, unable to breathe properly, and unable to explain to himself or anyone else what had just happened to him. 6 seconds that 47 witnesses would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe to people who had not been in the room, finding each time that the description fell short of the thing itself. Los Angeles, November 14, 1971. The Westwood Athletic Club, 3 blocks from UCLA. Late afternoon, the California sun cutting long shadows through the palm trees across the parking lot outside. The gymnasium occupied the entire second floor of the building. The air inside carried the accumulated smell of every serious training facility: chalk dust, leather, old sweat absorbed into canvas mats across 10,000 hours of effort. The main floor measured approximately 40 by 60 feet. Wrestling mats covered the central area. Heavy bags hung along the eastern wall. A boxing ring occupied the northwest corner, its ropes showing the wear of countless sessions. 47 people were present, 32 regular members and 15 guests who had come specifically for the private demonstration arranged 3 weeks earlier. The demonstration was scheduled to begin at 5 in the afternoon. The man giving it had arrived 12 minutes early and was standing near the water fountain speaking quietly with 2 of his students when the guests began filtering in. Bruce Lee was wearing a simple black t-shirt and dark training pants. No logos, no markings, nothing that demanded attention, because he had understood for years that genuine capability did not require advertisement and that the people who most loudly announced what they could do were generally the ones who most needed the announcement to do work that the capability itself could not. At 5'7" and 140 pounds, he was physically smaller than most of the men in the room. This fact had defined most of his professional life. Every audition where casting directors looked at his frame and saw limitation rather than potential. Every martial arts gathering where larger men assumed his reputation was exaggerated because reputation simply could not fit inside bodies that size. He had spent 23 years building something that did not photograph well, something that did not impress in still images or casual observation, something that revealed itself only in the fraction of a second when movement became necessary, and then revealed itself so completely that the people who witnessed it could not find adequate language for what they had seen. His forearms showed the particular development that comes from thousands of hours of Wing Chun training. The chain punching, the wooden dummy work, the specific conditioning that builds density rather than volume. His legs carried the quiet power of a man who had practiced the same kick 10,000 times and understood something different about it each time. He stood with his weight centered, shoulders relaxed, eyes moving across the room with the calm awareness of someone who had learned to see everything without appearing to look at anything in particular. 3 people had asked for autographs since he arrived. He signed each one with genuine courtesy. He remembered being unknown. He remembered the years when no one asked for anything except that he move aside and let more important people pass. The wrestler arrived at 4:52. 28 years old, 6'2", 290 pounds. 3-time collegiate wrestling champion from Ohio State University. He had transitioned to professional wrestling after college and discovered within 8 months that professional wrestling was choreographed entertainment with scripts and predetermined outcomes and the requirement to lose matches for storyline purposes. The discovery had disappointed him profoundly. He had believed he was entering a world of genuine competition. He had left and taken work as a physical trainer for wealthy clients in Beverly Hills. The work paid well. The respect it generated did not satisfy him the way competition once had. He had spent 12 years being the largest, strongest person in every room he entered. 12 years of the specific deference that extreme physical size generates in social situations, the way crowds part, the way conversations adjust, the way smaller men avoid direct eye contact or offer excessive friendliness as unconscious accommodation signals. He had come to experience this as validation of his physical superiority. He had confused the fear response that his size triggered with genuine respect for his capabilities. The distinction had never mattered before because his size had solved every problem that required physical resolution before the problem could adequately present itself. He had never needed to understand the difference. He had come to this demonstration because a client mentioned Bruce Lee was teaching. The client spoke about Bruce Lee with a reverence the wrestler found irritating. He had seen the Green Hornet. He had seen a small man performing choreographed fight sequences with stunt performers who were paid to fall down on cue. He had seen acting. He had not seen fighting. He believed he knew the difference. The demonstration began at 5 in the afternoon. Bruce Lee opened with centerline theory, The concept that the most direct line between two people is always the most efficient path for both attack and defense, and that training should develop the ability to control that line rather than work around it. He explained economy of motion, demonstrating how power was generated through structural alignment rather than muscular mass, how a properly executed strike delivered through the kinetic chain of a 140-pound body could produce force that a 250-pound man swinging his arm could not match, because the chain involved the entire body while the swing involved only the arm. He demonstrated 3 variations of the straight punch. The explanations were precise. The demonstrations were clean. 31 of the 32 regular members were engaged completely, asking follow-up questions, taking mental notes, watching his mechanics with the genuine technical curiosity of serious practitioners. The wrestler stood at the back of the group with his arms crossed over his 54-inch chest. His expression carried the particular condescension of someone watching a magic trick performed by someone who doesn't realize the audience already knows how the trick is done. At 5:15, Bruce Lee opened the floor for questions. 7 hands went up. He answered each one with patience and specificity, taking care to explain the principle behind the technique rather than just demonstrating the technique, because principles transferred while demonstrations only showed. At 5:21, the wrestler spoke without raising his hand. "I have a question." His voice carried across the gymnasium with the volume of someone accustomed to being heard without effort. 46 people turned toward him. Bruce Lee turned toward him. "Please." The wrestler uncrossed his arms and took 2 steps forward, separating himself from the group. "All of this looks impressive." He gestured broadly toward the demonstration area. "The speed, the technique, very pretty. But here's what I actually want to know." He paused, calculating. "Does any of this work against someone who knows how to fight?" He let the question land before continuing. "I wrestled at Ohio State. 3-time champion. I've been in real competitive situations against real athletes, not actors, not demonstration partners, real competitors trying to beat me as hard as I was trying to beat them." He was looking directly at Bruce now. "You're what, 140 pounds? I'm 290. I've taken down men who outweighed you by 100 pounds. I've controlled opponents who were actively resisting with everything they had. So my question is this: what happens when someone doesn't cooperate? What happens when someone doesn't fall down on cue?" Bruce Lee listened to all of it without visible reaction. His posture did not change. His expression did not shift. When he responded, his voice carried no defensiveness. "That is a reasonable question. Would you like a demonstration?" The wrestler smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just received exactly what they came for. "Yeah, I would." The 47 witnesses later provided accounts that were consistent enough in their specifics to be treated as a collective record of what happened. They agreed on the timing. They agreed on the sequence. They agreed that what they witnessed changed something fundamental about how they understood physical confrontation, in a way that none of them could entirely reverse even years later. The wrestler walked to the center of the mat. Bruce Lee removed his watch and handed it to one of his students. He walked to the center and stood approximately 8 feet from the wrestler, relaxed, hands at his sides. "When you're ready." The wrestler dropped into his wrestling stance. Technically correct, weight distributed properly, hands positioned for the shot, knees bent and ready to generate explosive forward drive. 12 years of training had made the setup automatic. He was going to shoot. He was going to drive forward, drop his level, wrap his arms around Bruce Lee's legs, and take him to the ground. On the ground, the weight advantage became absolute. On the ground, 290 pounds of trained wrestler was an insurmountable problem for 140 pounds of anything. He knew this. Everyone in the room knew this. The only path to avoiding this for the smaller man was to avoid the ground entirely, and avoiding the ground against a committed collegiate wrestling champion was not a thing that technique could reliably accomplish. Or so the room believed. The first second. The wrestler exploded forward with the speed that 12 years of daily practice produces, the level change automatic and explosive, hands reaching for Bruce Lee's legs, his entire body driving forward with the committed momentum of a takedown that had worked hundreds of times against opponents who were actively trying to prevent it. His hands found nothing. Bruce Lee was no longer where he had been. He had shifted laterally with a footwork adjustment so minimal that 3 witnesses later described it not as movement exactly, more as if he had simply been somewhere else when the takedown arrived. No dramatic evasion, no visible preparation, no indication in the half-second before the shot that he was about to move at all. Just, gone from the spot, standing slightly to the side of where he had been, the wrestler's momentum carrying him forward through empty space. The second. Bruce Lee's right hand fired. Not a punch in any conventional sense. A straight blast traveling approximately 14 inches from chamber to impact, a Wing Chun centerline strike moving along the most direct path from where his hand started to where the target was. The target was the wrestler's temple, exposed completely because his hands were low, reaching for legs that were no longer there, his head unprotected, his forward momentum making him structurally committed to a direction he could no longer change. The strike landed. The sound was the specific sharp impact of force concentrated at a precise anatomical point, different from the diffuse thud of a wide punch absorbing across a large surface area, more contained and more complete. The third second. The wrestler's nervous system processed the impact. The temple is a convergence point for critical neural pathways. Sufficient targeted force at this location disrupts the communication between the brain and the body in a way that muscle mass cannot prevent because the disruption is neurological rather than physical. It bypasses the muscles entirely and addresses the system that controls them. The wrestler's eyes lost the specific quality of focus that indicates coordinated sensory processing. His forward momentum continued, but his legs were no longer receiving coordinated instructions. He was not unconscious. He was experiencing something more disorienting than unconsciousness, the complete disconnection between what he intended to do and what his body was capable of doing, the specific helplessness of a man whose will was functioning but whose body had temporarily stopped listening to it. The fourth second. Bruce Lee's left leg generated a sidekick. The kick traveled from its chambered position to the wrestler's solar plexus in a timeframe that multiple witnesses would later describe as impossible to isolate in memory. They saw the chamber position and they registered the impact, but the motion between those 2 points was not something their visual processing could fully track. The power was generated through the kinetic chain in its complete expression, foot planted against the mat driving the force upward, hip rotated and driving forward, core contracted and transferring the momentum, all of it channeling through the extended leg into a contact point approximately 2 inches square at the precise anatomical location where the diaphragm meets the abdominal wall, the location where concentrated force most efficiently disrupts the body's breathing mechanism regardless of the muscular development surrounding it. All 140 pounds of Bruce Lee focused through that point. The wrestler's mouth opened. No sound emerged because no air was moving in either direction. His diaphragm had locked in the specific spasm that produces the complete temporary suspension of breathing function. The fifth second. 290 pounds of muscle and bone began its descent toward the mat. Not a controlled fall. Not the technical rolling and recovering that wrestling training develops as a response to being taken down by an opponent. An uncontrolled descent, the collapse of a structure whose coordination system had been disrupted at the neural level, whose arms were not rising to break the fall because the arms were not receiving the instructions that would make them rise. The body rotated slightly during the fall and landed on its right side with an impact that transmitted through the mat and into the wooden floor beneath it, a sound that registered in the bones of everyone present. The sixth second. The wrestler lay motionless. His eyes were open but unfocused, the specific quality of gaze that indicates the visual system is receiving input but the processing system is not organizing it into meaningful perception. His chest was making the effort to expand but finding no cooperation from the diaphragm, which was still in spasm. His hands were opening and closing in the slow involuntary pattern of a nervous system attempting to re-establish basic function from the bottom up. Bruce Lee stood 4 feet away. He had not broken his stance. He was not breathing heavily. He was watching the wrestler with the calm attention of someone assessing a situation rather than savoring it. No triumph in his posture, no performance of dominance, no acknowledgement that anything extraordinary had just occurred from his perspective, because from his perspective, what had just occurred was simply the application of principles he had spent 23 years developing to a situation that had required them. The room was completely silent. The silence lasted until the wrestler's breathing began to return, shallow and gasping at first, the sound of a body remembering how to perform a function that had been temporarily suspended rather than permanently removed. Diaphragm spasms release in their own time, and this one was releasing. Someone said Jesus Christ in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Bruce Lee walked to where the wrestler was lying. He crouched beside him with the unhurried efficiency of someone performing a task that required attention. He said, "Breathe slowly. Don't try to get up yet. Your diaphragm needs a moment to reset. Let it come back on its own. Don't force it." The instruction was delivered with the same precision and patience as everything else he had said that afternoon. No triumph in the tone, no satisfaction, no inflection suggesting that this outcome had been anything other than the natural result of what had been asked for. The wrestler had asked an honest question. He had received an honest answer. The transaction was complete and the concern now was for the person affected by it. The wrestler's eyes found Bruce Lee's face. What passed between them in that moment was visible to 47 people and understood fully by only 2, the specific private communication of a lesson that has arrived completely and cannot be unlearned, received by someone who had never previously needed to receive it. I'm sorry. The wrestler's voice was thin and strained, pushed through a throat and chest that were still recalibrating. The apology arrived with the quality of something genuine rather than performed. Bruce Lee shook his head. Don't apologize. You asked an honest question. You received an honest answer. There is no shame in learning. The only shame would be in refusing to learn after the lesson has been given. 2 students brought a stretcher from the gymnasium's medical supply closet. The wrestler's legs were functional, the neurological disruption was not permanent and would resolve completely within a few hours, but his coordination was sufficiently compromised that walking was not currently possible. He was placed on the stretcher and carried down the stairs by 4 men, placed into a vehicle, and transported to UCLA Medical Center for evaluation. The evaluation would confirm what Bruce had already assessed. No permanent injury. Complete recovery expected within the evening. A man who had been knocked from standing to prone in 6 seconds by someone 150 pounds lighter, and who would walk out of the hospital several hours later with a different understanding of physical confrontation than the one he had walked into the Westwood Athletic Club with that afternoon. As the vehicle pulled away from the building, Bruce Lee returned to the center of the gymnasium floor and looked at the 46 people remaining. Does anyone else have questions about practical application? No one did. The 47 witnesses compared accounts in the days that followed and found them consistent in every meaningful particular. The timing, 6 seconds, with no witness accounting it as longer and several accounting it as shorter. The sequence, lateral movement that made the takedown miss, straight strike to the temple, sidekick to the solar plexus, collapse. The quality of the movements, the absence of visible preparation, the minimal displacement required, the complete economy of every motion that produced each result. And the aftermath. Bruce Lee crouching beside the man he had just put on the floor with genuine concern for his recovery and no apparent interest in what 47 people would take away from having witnessed it. The story spread through Los Angeles's martial arts community the way stories spread when they carry information that practitioners find genuinely useful, quickly and with the core facts preserved, because the people telling it understood what the facts meant and were not interested in embellishing something that required no embellishment. The wrestler resumed his work as a personal trainer. He did not return to the Westwood Athletic Club. He did not seek a rematch or attempt to reframe what had happened in conversations with people who asked about it. When people who knew him asked, he said simply that he had challenged Bruce Lee and learned something he should have understood before issuing the challenge, that size determined the outcome of physical confrontation only when the person on the other side of the confrontation had no answer for it, and that assuming no answer existed because no answer had previously been required was a form of arrogance that sooner or later produced exactly the kind of afternoon he had spent in Westwood. He said Bruce Lee had been completely correct. Strength without understanding was force. Force without precision was noise. And the man he had gone to the Westwood Athletic Club to expose as a fraud had demonstrated, in 6 seconds and with less apparent effort than the wrestler had used to lace his shoes that morning, that the distinction between those two things was not theoretical. Bruce Lee died in July 1973, 20 months after that November afternoon. The 47 witnesses scattered across different lives and different decades, but the accounts they gave when asked about what they had seen remained consistent across time in the way that accounts remain consistent when what they described was real and complete and required no revision or embellishment to carry the weight of what actually happened. 6 seconds. That was the number. Not approximately 6, not somewhere around 6, not a few seconds that felt like 6, precisely, confirmed by multiple witnesses comparing against the clock on the gymnasium wall and against each other, the exact interval between the beginning of the takedown attempt and the moment 290 pounds was lying on the mat. 6 seconds that contained within them everything that needed to be said about the difference between size that performs and understanding that destroys, between the confidence of a man who has never needed to be wrong and the precision of a man who has spent 23 years becoming right, between physical mass that fills a room and physical capability that fills the 6 seconds that matter. The floor of the gymnasium at the Westwood Athletic Club absorbed the impact at the end of those 6 seconds and gave nothing away about what had just occurred. 47 people walked out into the California evening carrying it instead. And most of them were still carrying it at the end of their lives, because some things stay with a person not because they were dramatic but because they were true, and truth at that intensity of demonstration does not fade the way ordinary memories fade. It stays. It sits. It answers questions that arise across a lifetime about the relationship between what we think we know and what we actually know. 6 seconds was enough for all of that.